Are you a plotter or a pantser? Are you an architect or a gardener? If you've ever read or watched a beginner's writing lesson, this question will be close to the top. Plotters or architects figure out the book from start to end, and only once everything is planned do they begin to write. Pantsers write by the seed of their pants, starting their garden from a cool idea seed and growing it organically, figuring out the novel as they go. Of course, it's not either or, and most writers will fall somewhere in the middle. They'll do a little or a lot of planning, followed by a lot or a little improvisation. Conventional wisdom is that architects are methodical and efficient as they follow their plan, while gardeners meander through a lot of trial and error as they prune, move things around, and nurture whatever flourishes. They'll tell you to try both extremes and stick to what you like, but oh please, if you have a choice, be an architect, because it's so much better to work that way. I have no doubt that they're right, but you see, I'm all the way over here, a good 90% into gardener territory. I'll have a cool concept, and I'll have an end goal for the protagonist, and that's about it. Believe me, I tried. I tried to move this needle further to the left, but for me, the plotting process, it's like getting an enema. A terribly uncomfortable experience that produces little more than a bucket of runny stank. The ideas that spring up the moment I start writing utterly trounce whatever I come up with during plotting, making all those carefully devised plans as worthless as your philosophy major. Most of the lessons I've watched out there are geared towards the architect approach, so it's hard not to get the feeling you're a second-class citizen if you rather grow a garden than design a skyscraper. But let me tell you, I love writing novels this way, and the main reason is encapsulated in one word: discovery. Nothing beats the shivers you get when you stumble upon a nugget of brilliance at the bottom of a muddled rabbit hole. You come up with that perfect solution to your narrative problem, and it's like the skies opened up and rained pogs upon your head. Your characters interact with each other in a way you didn't expect, and this leads you down a plot that's leagues better than what you started with. And that's freaking delightful. I suppose there isn't as much guidance specific to this methodology because it's pretty much summed up by sit down and write, stupid. I hope you know by now there are no significant shortcuts. You should still end up with a ton of backstory, character notes, and structure outlines, preferably neatly organized in a document. The only difference being you are developing these things as you write, instead of before you start. So by the gardener's own nature, this can't be a step-by-step guide. Your step-by-step is writing from your seed, getting to the end of whatever you have figured out, and then asking, what now? And you hope you can come up with some answer that's good enough. Then, once you get a story out of that process, congratulations, you're halfway. Now you need to work on revisions until you make the whole thing look like you planned it from the start. What I can give you is a few guidelines and troubleshooting tips to keep the ball rolling towards somewhere interesting. Like everyone else should be telling you, there are exceptions to every rule, and if you find something that works better for what you want to accomplish, never feel like you have to stick to whatever arbitrary guideline got into your head. All that matters is having a good final product. Nobody gives a damn how you got there. So you have a story idea and you want to make that into a novel, but you just don't know how to get past the start. Maybe you don't even know where to start. Well, a huge part of having a fertile seed is leaning on compelling characters, and not just compelling to read, but characters that literally compel the plot forward. Because you're writing, you get to that spot you haven't figured out yet, and you ask, what now? It's your characters answering that question. What do they want? What do they fear? What stands in their way? How can they get around it? Who cares about them in their life? Who can they ask for help if they need it? These types of questions will help you carry on with the story, and be sure to answer them in a way that makes sense, because unless you're purposefully making a mystery out of Nancy's motivations, you never want the reader to ask, why would Nancy do that? Few things ruin a story faster than nonsensical decisions. If you're trying to decide where to start at all, think about what your main character wants and start the story at the moment they acquire that motivation. Later on, you can decide to move things around if you want to build up to that moment or whatever, but All you need for now is something to get the ball rolling. Don't obsess over how your story starts until you've properly discovered it. I'm super guilty of this. I'll needlessly tinker with the starting chapter only to realize the story doesn't really start there anymore. Really, you need to internalize the next point. It's not a linear process. Before I started writing, I imagined writing a novel as something you start at the beginning and finish at the ending. Then maybe you go back and edit from the start to the end. As a pantser, you'll discover it's not quite like that because your work on the latest chapter is often going to come up with ideas and background material that weren't there at the start. This enables you to go back to previous chapters and grow them or prune them as they require. I'm going against conventional wisdom here. I've heard many times that you need to silence your inner editor and just plow ahead to finish your first draft. And this is excellent advice for the architect. But if the gardener were to 100% stick to this, they would likely end up with the withered, chaotic gnarl of a first draft. You'll get to the end and because your story is so different to what you thought it would be at the start, you'll be utterly crushed by the enormous task of making it all a cohesive, deliberate whole. This isn't to say you should be constantly going back and rearranging things. That's indulgent. But do it in moderation. My rule of thumb, and I don't know if this is the best, is just the one I use, is to reread the current chapter every time I finish a scene, and reread the novel every time I finish a chapter, at least until I progress to the approximate midpoint of the story. At that point, you'll have a much better concept for everything you're trying to do, and revision won't need to be as heavy. This does mean your first draft will take a long time to complete. But at least in my experience, it will be an extremely clean document by the time you get to the end, and further revision will be a lot easier than your progress thus far. Do bear in mind, revision is my favorite part of writing a novel, so I'm a bit biased there. Like I said before, find out what works for you. It's often listed as a downside that you'll be scrapping chunks of writing all the time, because your lack of a solid plan means you'll inevitably come to narrative dead ends, write pointless scenes, and find yourself with obsolete work as new bits of lore develop that contradict something you've already written. Yep, that's all true. You'll probably be facing all of those at one point or another. But you see, that's just the way the process works for us pantsers. The secret is to not look at it as a downside at all. Lean into it. Go down that weird path. Write that pointless scene. Change your lore for the better, despite knowing you'll have to adjust what came before. Because, what is your goal? Is it to write as little as possible? Is it to have an easy time writing your novel? No. Your goal is to produce a great story. And we do that by discovering improvements around every corner. Don't resent that process. Embrace it. But, of course, this bit of advice is awful if you ignore the second half, which is the following. Kill your darlings. I'm sure you've heard this expression before. It means you must learn to delete pieces of writing you love. And you better get good at it as a gardener, because if something ends up not working, if something is superfluous or meandering, or it contradicts something awesome in your story, you need to kill it. When evaluating something you wrote, all that matters is whether it helps your story or not. You can be lenient while putting together your first draft, but once the ending starts taking solid shape, it's time to go back and be ruthless. Single sentences or entire scenes, if they don't belong, they have to go. It's not wasted work. All that writing helped you define characters, work out motivations, figure out plot puzzle pieces. At the very least, it helped you hone your prose. And often you'll find you can recycle the best bits by plugging them somewhere else, because remember, it is not a linear process. Every part of your novel is evolving at all times, all the way to the final draft. Something I often do is over-explain motivations and decision justifications in my first draft, stating them out in literal sentences because, I'm working them out for myself as I write. Then later I go back and I realize, all those extra words are not necessary anymore because the characters' motivations are baked into the story and their personalities. How can you tell what belongs in your story, you ask? Well, the answer to that question is what makes your novel good. So it's a far bigger question than I could answer. That's the real hard part, isn't it? Learning to know what the hell you're doing. We're all in that particular journey, right? A great place to start is a series of lectures by Brandon Sanderson, who's a contender for greatest fantasy author of all time. In these lectures, he goes through an enormous amount of useful information to craft good stories. He gives you hard and fast checklists to follow, all kinds of helpful tools to stop your story from becoming hot garbage. Highly recommended. I can't think of anything else to tell you, so good luck with your gnarled mess of weeds. I hope something beautiful grows out of it.